As I was preparing my next lesson of history for After Exile Before Messiah, I quickly realized the time that we're in. As this video is released, we are now at the end of July 2023, moving into historically the most volatile time period of the year. And add to that, because of another factor that most people tend to forget, but ironically they're definitely moved by, we almost always see things happen that provoke our emotions. During this time, we see events or situations that tend to lead us irrationally into following agendas and traps created for us. We are moving into August 2023, which starts the real beginning of the United States presidential campaigns. And consequentially, this period normally comes with some kind of drama that usually gets the masses' attentions who are looking for change and for answers. With everything going on, I expect these next few months to be eventful. And rather than you being moved to be reactive when things come by shock or surprise, it is better that you are brought to a place where you're mentally ready, so that you're not moved by provocations of fear. Most of us know and recognize by now that our news media does not actually report the news to keep us informed, but to move us down paths set for us to go. So those of us who follow the news and rely on them to tell us what we need to know, we will always be steps behind the truth, and we will only be puppets being moved down the path the world is being led on. For those of us in Messiah who truly want to be ready for his kingdom, we must be harmless as doves and wise as serpents. We cannot ignore our enemy, but we also cannot just listen to his every word because they are mostly built around lies with sprinklings of truth to keep people deceived. Those of us in Messiah, those waiting for his kingdom, are literally the most important people alive today because we are truly the future. We must live like we know this and preserve ourselves and overcome. So it is important that every now and then we get a quick mental adjustment away from the mainstream so that we can be mentally ready and proactively guarding our minds and heart away from the enemy. So we need to discuss the state of our world and what is actually happening so that when agendas begin to form, we are not caught off guard, but we're ready. Let's begin. Okay, so before we get into things, let's first make sure that a couple things are made clear. First thing I need to make sure is understood is the difference between the truth and the narrative. There is a big difference, and I think this point is lost on the masses. When you're trying to understand what is really going on in this world, besides understanding the spiritual aspect and understanding the real agenda that the world is being led to worship the devil, that's the real reality. But besides that understanding, the truth of what is really happening behind the scenes is pretty much lost from us unless there are whistleblowers that come out from the shadows and start exposing things. And even if they do, who's to say you can even trust them? So a search for truth, in my opinion, is not something we can be on when understanding world agendas. Like for instance, I believe there are human clones. I believed this for a while. It even seems that with all that going on with Jamie Foxx, he now was in a show on Netflix about cloning. I haven't seen it yet, so I don't really know what they're saying in there. But I do believe personally that they've cloned people. But there is no searching or finding this out for sure unless someone comes out from the shadows who has done this and says it's true. And even if they did, would I really even believe them? So me searching out the truth of all this, that's pointless. Does that make sense? Now we can absolutely find truth, especially through history and understanding the past. Because believe it or not, most of these agendas are documented. But right now, while we're understanding things in real time, we don't have access enough behind the shadows to really know what people are actually doing. So what should we do when we're trying to understand what these people are doing in their planning? What I do is I pay attention to their narratives. That's because the narratives that they tell are what moves populations. The world works off narratives. And what exactly is a narrative? A narrative is a spoken or written account of connected events. It's a story. And that's what they're feeding us with. Stories. Connected events that lead into a storyline that provokes people into a certain action, following a story. It's what they tell us in our news. It's what they write in our history books. It's all narratives. It doesn't mean that it's true. It's just the way they are telling the story. It's what they want the world to believe. And that's what the narrative is. And in a mental war, this is what we're fighting against, because most of the truth is hidden behind the curtains. It's like with the pandemic. The narrative was that we were all fighting a virus, and this was the narrative that the world believed. Now, if you didn't believe that narrative, and you believed you were actually fighting against a certain technology that you couldn't even mention, then as they were coming at you with their mind control, because you weren't aligned to that narrative that they were feeding, you might have had more peace during those times, and then you wouldn't follow them down the path they were leading everyone towards their solution. I know personally too many people who fell to that agenda because they followed the narrative instead of understanding that it was just that, a narrative, a story. They are feeding us with stories that lead us in certain directions. Like I said, it's connected events that lead into a story that provokes people into a certain action. And that's all we're seeing. So please be clear that as I am discussing things, I need it to be clear that I do not believe a word about what they're actually saying. And I do not truly believe that this is what is truly going on. I am just following their narratives. I know where the world is heading. I know this from a biblical mindset first, but also a financial mindset and a secular mindset based on a lot of study. So if you know where the world is going, you can see based on the narratives that they are creating where they're trying to lead everyone. Now, the next thing I think that is important that I don't think many people are talking about or making people aware of, but you must recognize, is how this system operates. The American system, which currently leads this current world order, is one that is led through cycles of change, and they do this through the changing of leadership. Depending on the agenda, they introduce leaders that can lead the public in hope, leading the masses to embrace change and solutions. For instance, the last election when Biden became president. Before Biden was president, the left was completely against taking any solution for the pandemic that Trump was a part of. Even the presidential candidates themselves expressed this thought.
But if Donald Trump tells us that we should take it, I'm not taking it.
So we went through an election cycle that was about a whole bunch of nonsense. It had many other agendas baked in, like the start of the end of the United States democracy with that dumb January 6th event. But the major agenda was the changing of the guard so that the masses that were so heavily mind controlled to hate Trump, they were now ready to trust the government and their solution.
Now this campaign is over. What is the will of the people? What is our mandate? I believe it's this. Americans have called upon us to marshal the forces of decency, the forces of fairness, to marshal the forces of science and the forces of hope in the great battles of our time. The battle to control the virus, the battle to build prosperity, the battle to secure your family's health care, the battle to achieve racial justice and root out systemic racism in this country.
Mind you, it was the same solution, the same technology, nothing changed. The only thing that changed was who was in leadership. They changed the leader in order to bring acceptance to their overall agenda. And this is what they do with these presidential cycles. It's all about orchestrating narratives for change, and so what normally precedes the election are events that bring about a desire for change. If you don't understand that completely, let's review some of the US presidential elections. Like I just explained, the 2020 election, this election was about the answer to COVID. Easy to see. The 2016 election, this was when Trump was elected. There were a few things going on in the lead up to Trump being elected. Being almost 8 years ago, and with people's short-term memories, people probably don't fully remember everything that led up to that. In the lead up to this election, we had Obama focusing on more of the world and not the country.
First of all, the integration of national economies into a global economy. That's here. That's done. And so the question is not whether or not there's going to be an international global economy. There is one.
He signed climate change deals, trans-Pacific trade. He was focusing on Syria and Crimea. It was a world agenda, but things in the United States were not good as well. At the time before the election, the Fed was stopping their QE, and by December 2015, less than a year before the election, the Fed, led by Janet Yellen, began to raise interest rates for the first time since the Great Recession. Most probably don't remember, but in 2015, the United States economy was in a downfall. Like this article from CNN says, U.S. economy grinds to a near halt at the end of 2015. The United States economy was so slow that several historically reliable indicators of imminent recession were waving red flags. Everybody expected a recession. Industrial production was negative over 12 months, and retail sales growth was falling. And this is why a person like Donald Trump was favored in many eyes. The major thought was that we don't need a politician, we need a businessman to fix the problems. And that's why Trump was embraced. If those problems didn't occur, Trump probably wouldn't even been thought of. But the problems that led to Trump's rise really didn't start until the first Republican debates were starting.
Because we have to stop doing things for some people, but for this country, it's destroying our country. We have to stop, and it has to stop now.
Just look at the history. Let's look at the 2008 election. This is when we saw Obama come out of nowhere and do just as he said he would do and fundamentally transform America.
We are 5 days away from fundamentally transforming the United States of America.
The way this country is today is wholly due to the influence of that administration. From socialism to everything else in the middle, he brought massive change. He was claimed to be the first black president, but the acceptance of this, it didn't just come out of nowhere. It was carefully guided. The year before the election in 2007, people were mostly discussing how much everyone hated George Bush. But as that year progressed, a few things started happening. In April of 2007, New Century Financial declared bankruptcy. They were a company that specialized in subprime mortgages.
Another casualty in the subprime mortgage mess. After weeks of speculation, New Century Financial has finally filed for bankruptcy protection amid a surge in homeowner defaults. In recent months, more than 24 subprime lenders have closed their doors.
They were at that time the biggest mortgage lender to collapse at the time of the slumping U.S. housing market. The Irvine, California-based company fired 3,200 employees, which represented 54% of its workforce. This is very similar to how we see this year starting with the banking crisis with Silicon Valley Bank, also in California, and the other banks as well, just to add perspective. It's the same story. But in 2007, this was the start to something bigger that people weren't able to see yet. As 2007 continued, foreclosures were on the rise and people were losing their homes, and the United States economy began to collapse, in which we now call the Great Recession.
Over the past several months, I've held a series of meetings with my economic team on the outlook for the U.S. economy. And before I left for the Middle East, I directed them to conduct a thorough assessment of our economic condition, consult with members of Congress, and provide me with their recommendations about any actions we might need to take. The economic team reports that our economy has a solid foundation, but that there are areas of real concern. The economy is still creating jobs, though at a reduced pace. Consumer spending is still growing, but the housing market is declining. Business investment and exports are still rising, but the cost of imported oil has increased. My administration has been watching our economy carefully. My advisors and many outside experts expect that our economy will continue to grow over the coming year. I'm optimistic about our economic future because Americans have shown time and again that they are the most industrious, creative, and enterprising people in the world. That's what has made our economy strong, and that is what will make us stronger in the challenging times ahead. Thank you.
The speed with which we are watching this market deteriorate.
We're red everywhere, essentially, down by 4-5%.
We're down over 16%.
Dow at the same time has fallen about 18%.
The stock market is now down 21%.
Because we're now down 43%.
What in the world is happening on Wall Street?
Two-year no yields went from 190 to 166 in the blink of an eye.
On the NASDAQ, everything and more has been completely wiped out.
It was the worst day on Wall Street since the crash of 1987.
From the financial capital of the world, the opening bell is going to ring in 5 seconds, and to be honest with you, we wish it wouldn't.
The country was dealing with extremely rough times, and these things began to heat up, leading us into the presidential election, which was complete mental manipulation. In the debates, I remember they first started talking about the war.
By a voter in Iowa, if you get us out of Iraq and somehow al-Qaeda does take over, what do you do then?
Look, if we had followed my judgment originally, we wouldn't have been in Iraq. We're here now, and we've got no good options. We've got bad.
But as the economy began to collapse, people were desperate for change.
5,000 people are expected to show up over the next 3 days to apply for just 500 jobs at a new water park.
For a job, I'll do backflips.
Pamela Thomas has been looking for work for 6 months.
No. Everywhere is no.
The job market is collapsing. For 13 straight months now, the economy's been shedding jobs.
I mean, that's what Obama's slogan was. I think it was change we can believe in. And this is how we were led into the first black president. People were desperate for change. They were looking for hope and change. And they weren't even given a fair choice. It was a choice between the past and the future. People were led right into the change.
In this election, at this defining moment, change has come to America.
Change has come to America. And if you follow the history of how it all started, things didn't really start heating up until the first debates. When they are moving in regards to change, it always seems to come during these presidential cycles. The same way a corporation changes CEOs as they are embarking on new strategies or they want the company to be looked at in a different way is the same way that they use the office of president. And so what I'm saying is that with about 16 months before the next presidential election, if you understand how this country and this system works, you should be expecting some major events that will be leading us into a new season. And this season is different than any other one we have ever seen. We are at the point of the United States' decline of power. Me personally, I think that we will see Nikki Haley become the next president for multiple reasons. Particularly because just like the first black president 16 years ago, to me, it seems to be fitting that the next agenda will bring about the first female president, who also was an ambassador to the United Nations, which will help with the overall transition of the world into world governance. Let me state that this is only my view and is nothing worthy of debate over. I don't really care that much. I'm just being transparent how I see things moving. Right now, we are distracted by DeSantis and Trump, but I personally believe that she will be the nominee of the party and more than likely will be the spokesperson for change. Again, this is my personal opinion. So if you understand all of that in regards to the United States presidential election coming up, I mean, we got a debate coming up towards the end of August 23rd to be exact, and there isn't much buzz about it yet. And that's only because we're not ready to be moved yet. But if you understand how all this works, as things start moving, you can be mentally ready for it and understand why certain things would be happening. So let's understand what is happening. The first thing to understand is that the economic recession that since last year, everyone, including myself, have been warning of, it has not come into effect, even though the Fed has gone through a historic rate raising cycle since last year. The Fed just raised rates again, and even into this week, the Dow was on its longest winning streak since 2017, over 6 years. The market continues to be led higher, even though rates last year were at 0% and now they're over 5%. And the US debt is poised to hit 33 trillion, which I expect to be on the tongue of every Republican presidential candidate in the coming debates. Everything is crazy. None of this makes sense. And it's clear to anyone paying attention that this is not a free market, but one that is heavily under control. Things will not move or change until they're ready for their narrative of decline to go forth. They keep alluding to the masses that the Fed might pull off a soft landing, meaning beating the fight against inflation while not triggering a recession. And I guess because we haven't seen problems yet, people are starting to believe this. I honestly do not know how much I can stress to not follow this thought and not to get caught being distracted or overly optimistic because things have not changed yet. Always remember, we are one bad headline away, and it is coming. Just like in 2007 with the housing crisis, it looks like this next event will be a banking crisis. And just as they did in 2007, it looks like they will follow the same script. In January 2007, the Dow was at 12,463. By October 9th, 2007, it went up to 14,164, which was an all-time high at that time. That was a 10% increase over 10 months. And though things were happening, getting everyone ready for the collapse, most of the population was not ready because the market was still climbing. This is what you need to get. As long as they keep the stock market under control, people don't really care about what's really under the hood. But in the lead up, by the end of July of 2007, the investment bank, Bear Stearns, liquidated 2 hedge funds that invested in risky securities backed by subprime mortgage loans. Those were the things that were set to start the whole collapse. But at that time, that was a signal that they were in trouble. Then, August 6th, American Home Mortgage Investment, which specialized in adjustable rate mortgages, they filed for bankruptcy protection. August 16th, Fitch Ratings cut the credit rating of giant mortgage lender Countrywide Financial to its 3rd lowest investment grade rating. All of this signaling problems, and they started right in the second half, right before the debates for the presidential election. Anyways, after all those events, people were still not moved into reality, because through all of that negative news, the Dow still hit an all-time high leading into October. But shortly after that, the stock market went into a 17-month decline. It went from 14,164 down to 6,469 on March 6, 2009. But again, this didn't just come out of nowhere. The warning signs were given early in 2007 with New Century going into bankruptcy. They showed us early in the beginning of that year what the problem was. People just weren't paying attention until everything went into free fall. And by that time, most of the people were not ready. They literally, right now, are running the same script again. And people haven't learned from the mistakes of the past. And that's why I'm going back into the history, so you could be waking up and not following these people and just distracted like everyone else is. If you remember, they started this year with Silicon Bank failure happening in February. And the market is still climbing even with all the risks surrounding it. And everyone knows it's crazy. Listen to Andrew Ross Sorkin of CNBC speak about it as he speaks to one of the famed investors from The Big Short, who was ready for the collapse in 2007.
As somebody who did call the financial crisis right, what happened? 3 months ago, all we did around this table was we had different guests come on to hyperventilate about the banks, in particular about commercial real estate and what it was going to do to the regional banks, how that was going to create a death spiral. All of a sudden, either that has been forgotten, maybe people have their blinders on. I don't know what is going on, but that has somehow been removed from the discussion in a way that it seems surprising. And given your background, I'm sort of curious.
I don't think it's removed from the discussion. The banks have had a very large melt-up in a very short period of time.
You see, everything is crazy, and they know it is. But I guarantee most people around you don't have a clue. What you must do is understand the risk ahead of us and prepare yourself if those risks become real. You shouldn't fall for the same script twice. Now let's be clear. The Dow just came off a 13-day win streak. This is the second one that the Dow has ever had since the history of the Dow. The last one was in 1987, right before the stock market crash of 1987.
U.S. stocks ended lower on Thursday, with the Dow snapping a historic 13-day rally, its longest winning streak since 1987.
This is not a coincidence. There are so many different scripts being run that correlate with this coming collapse. Things that resemble 2008, 1987, and definitely 1929. It is important that this history is not overlooked and glossed over. As we see the script come together, there will be many different factors that tug for your attention. And it's very important that while these things come together, you do not allow yourself to get distracted and be caught off guard. Now, there are other things I need to discuss, but I spent a little too much time on this part of the discussion, and I actually think it needs to be highlighted on its own. The rest of the topics that need to be reviewed, I have put that in this next video. It's important that you recognize what happened in the past in order that you do not fall for the same script twice. And I don't think that enough people are aware of all this correlation. Please take the advice and stay awake. Make sure you take hold of Messiah's words and take heed to yourselves, lest your hearts be weighed down with carousing, drunkenness, and cares of this life, and that day come on you unexpectedly. For it will come as a snare on all those who dwell on the face of the whole earth. Watch therefore and pray always that you may be counted worthy to escape all these things that will come to pass and to stand before the Son of Man. That's Luke chapter 21 verses 34 through 36. I pray this every day. I hope you pray the same. If you watch and stay sober-minded, you will be ready, and I made this video in order to bring this up to you so that you are ready. Now, of course, there are more things going on, and so I have split this video up in hopes that these points do not get forgotten and glossed over as we see what else is happening in the world. Please click the link to watch this next video and make sure you stay ready for the times ahead. Be blessed, and thanks for watching. I love you all.